Welcome back to the Secret Society of Man podcast. I am Ryan. I'm here with my cousin Zach, and we have an interesting one for you today. So the first story we want to cover is from the good old state of Georgia, the Peach State, as they like to say. And there's a guy by the name of Young Thug. I think his actual name is like Jeffrey Williams or something like that. So he is involved in Georgia's longest running criminal trial or case, whatever you want to call it, which I find very interesting because Georgia is a very old state. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that this is going on, especially since we're past COVID. But so bottom line is he was involved in some gang stuff. Sounds like distributing guns or like buying or selling guns as well as like distribution of drugs. And so he got charged with the RICO Act, which we've talked about before with like John Gotti and a couple of the mafia stuff. Same thing, like mafia is a gang, any gang nowadays. So that's what he was charged with. Pled guilty eventually, like recently. I don't know if something came out where they're like, look, this is your last chance. If you plead guilty, you can avoid prison time. He was given like 40 years or something like that, 40-year sentence. Now, I read on there it was like 20 and 20, like 20-year probation, 20-year behind bars type of thing. But still, regardless, 40 years is a long time. So he pleads guilty. He gets the 15 years probation. If he violates that probation anyway, it's 20 years prison on top of that. So what are your thoughts on Young Thug?
Yeah, well, the sentence is remarkably light. I mean, it basically is like, I think he's going to basically do no prison time, unless, of course, he violates probation. But in Georgia, if you serve 3 years of your probation without violating it, then basically the rest gets waived. So really, it's 3 years of probation is what all of this resulted in. There's a risk of him going to prison. He might have to do a little bit of prison time, but I know that he's been in prison. I think for like 4 years, however long this case has been going on, a couple of years.
So he's served time.
Yeah, so he's also given time served, which is being included in that. So very little prison time, long probation, which will most likely all be waived. But I really think the reason that he ended up pleading guilty is because this case has been a shit show on the side of the prosecution. There's been, I haven't had time to delve into all of it because it's been a very long case, as you've said. But there's multiple things that the prosecution messed up on, that the judge has done that was ethically shady. And I think what ended up happening is this has been going on so long, there's been so many mistakes by the prosecution that they had the option where the defense could have maybe asked for a mistrial or a retrial, and they could have tried again. But I think he decided to plead guilty instead because now he has leverage. Because they messed up so badly, this is probably the most favorable deal that he can hope to get, and he would rather take this deal, do barely any prison time, 3 years of probation realistically, rather than place his bet that the next time they try this trial, that the prosecution is going to be as incompetent as they were this time. So they said, well, he has the power and the good position, he's just going to take it and get it over with. One of the things that happened in this case that was very controversial is Young Thug's attorney got sentenced to prison or jail for contempt of court. Yep. And the reason for this is because somehow he found out that the judge and the prosecution and one of the witnesses had a private meeting called ex parte meeting where the defense was not included in that meeting. Yep. And, you know, all parties should be included in any meetings pertaining to a case. So they had this meeting. Somehow the defense finds out, and he goes on the stand and he calls out the judge and says, hey, I was informed that you're having this meeting without me knowing. And the judge was obviously caught off guard, and he said, well, you need to tell me how you found out about this meeting because you weren't included in it. So how did you find out? And the attorney would not disclose his source, which he doesn't really have to because of, attorney-client privilege. I mean, he can keep those things to himself, his sources, right? And so he decided not to say anything, and the judge was upset, basically, that the defense found out about this secret meeting, and so held the attorney in contempt of court, sentenced him to 20 weekends in jail, and the attorney said that he wanted to be held in jail with his client, Young Thug, which is a pretty gangster move on his part. So I think that's just one of many things that was going really odd in this case, and the prosecution messed up, and the judge messed up, and that's what put him in the position to get such a favorable deal.
Yeah, and did you ever, because I never found out the reason why the ex parte happened, did you ever figure out what that was about?
I don't know what they talked about, but, I mean, it was a meeting between the prosecution and the judge and one of the key witnesses, who I think ended up pleading the fifth. I don't know exactly what the implications of that is and how it affected the case, but I think the defense attorney basically framed it as coercion of a witness because it was just an unfair meeting with this witness, and it could have changed the outcome of the trial and the information that was given.
It makes me wonder what happened behind those closed doors. I mean, it wasn't recorded, so who knows? I mean, have you ever seen the show Your Honor?
No.
Okay. Highly recommend. It's on Netflix now. It was on HBO, but it's on Netflix now. Highly recommend. Kind of similar. I'll give you a quick premise on it, but basically there's a bad accident the first episode, and someone ends up dying. Well, come to find out that, and I won't give relationships because I highly recommend watching it, the judge knows the person that killed this person in the crash, and the person fled the scene, and it turns out like he kind of sways things in the courts, and things kind of go sideways and all that. So anyway, so you should watch that. But Young Thug, I don't know much about him. I didn't read up on him prior to us chatting about him. I just saw like it was the longest criminal case in Georgia history, so it kind of made me click on it. Mm-hmm. What makes me wonder is he's pretty young, if I remember, and I feel like, you ever heard the song Gangster's Paradise?
Yeah.
Okay. So that song sounds all grandiose and stuff, but the point of the song is actually a negative connotation on gangsters. And it just talks about how they're essentially killing each other, and like they end up in prison, or they die early, die young, stuff like that. And it really makes you wonder, like, what is going through this guy's head of, this racketeering. I mean, is he even going to care? Like, he's getting out. He's got no prison. I mean, like you said, he's done 3 to 4 years in prison already, but, I mean, is it going to build his street credibility at this point? Like, he's just going to go sell more stuff, right? I mean, look at Snoop Dogg. I mean, the guy was known for selling and using marijuana still to this day, which obviously marijuana now has looked a lot differently than what it was, but, like, back then, I mean, it was a big deal, right? So what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I just never understand why so many of these rappers that are rich and successful end up going to prison for these stupid things. I mean, you hear all the time, Kodak Black had to go to prison, Bobby Shmurda, like these people, they'll end up going to prison after they've already made it. And they have this like way of talking where they're doing the music to get out of the streets, and so they don't have to do these crimes, but then they still do it. And it just makes me think that it isn't how some people frame it, where it's like a poverty thing. I guess maybe it starts out that way,
sure, but
this type of behavior isn't all out of necessity and out of like Robin Hood type actions where they need to join a gang in order to feed their family. In this case, Young Thug is supposedly the leader of this gang.
Yeah.
And I believe the name of the gang is a reference to his label. So, like, this is something that was started after he already was rich and successful, and he decided to go and do this crime. So it's obviously not a poverty thing as much as it is like a cultural thing.
Choice and a cult, yeah.
And then you have, this stuff is so ingrained in the lyrics and the content of rap. Maybe they feel some pressure to still participate in this, otherwise they'll be seen as a fraud. King Von?
Mm-hmm.
So he is known as, one of the most psychopathic rappers that there are, because, this guy really was out there killing all the people that he talked about. And, he basically would be talking about it publicly on Twitter and, like, beefing with these people, and then he'd go and, like, kill them. And it was, like, he really was out there doing the things he was talking about. And on some level, that's why he was so well respected. I mean, his lyrics are amazing, the way that he can tell a story. But
because it happened.
Exactly. But like the way that he
God,
can
that's
weave
so
it into a
deep.
story is insane. But he, so he can tell these stories about things he actually did,
Yeah.
and that gives him that credibility. So there is something to that. But what does it say about their priorities when they literally have made it? They're in like the top 1% in the world. They're rich. That all their friends are rich now, and they still throw it away over all this stuff. You got to just sit there in jail. Even if you get off, essentially, like he is now. I mean, he got a light sentence. He's still been in jail for years fighting this thing.
Yeah.
You got to feel like a complete idiot in there.
There's a rapper I'm trying to think of. He died around Mac Miller's time. African-American rapper. He overdosed on a plane. They landed a plane, he overdosed, and they couldn't get him to the hospital in time. But I can't believe... He released an album posthumously or whatever they call that. But he talks about in his songs a lot about struggle with addiction, struggle with the fame and what comes with the addiction, with the fame, and not being able to get out of it. And it really does make me wonder, like, what does that mean, though? Like, what do you mean you can't get out of it? Because I feel like a lot of it is truly a choice. Like, are you going to burn bridges and sacrifice things maybe less successfully because you say no instead of yes? Probably. But that's a choice, right? Like, there is one thing where they're like, well, I had to do it. It's like, well, not really. I mean, you felt like you did in the moment, but you really didn't. You know what I mean? And so it makes me wonder... like him creating this gang and stuff, like, what, are you just being stupid, or is that, like, did it start out as like a organization for young kids and then all of a sudden you turn them into a gang, which, by the way, when I was reading about Young Thug, I found out that he actually either used to be a part of the Bloods out on the West Coast, or he still has like some affiliation with the Bloods, the Crips and the Bloods,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what the deal is, and unfortunately the article I read never really explained why he started the gang in the first place, especially after he was already successful with this rap game. So makes me wonder.
Yeah, it seems like if they're saying that they had to do these things, I think that what that means to me is like they had to do it in order to maintain the respect on their name. But it's interesting because once you're at that level, they call it fuck you money for a reason. Like, you should be able to not have to lower yourself to gain the respect of the people that basically you left behind. You can bring your friends up and everything like that, but at that point, I mean, why do you even care about what people on the streets are saying about you? I think that, even any band of any genre gets called a sellout after they've made it, but I feel like rap is the only genre where after you make it, you still have to cater to the people that basically are upset that you became so successful. And it's like you're letting them tear you down by still participating in those, that basically like kid shit. I mean, the people that do this gang stuff and all this violence and these dumb crimes, a lot of them, we talked about this before, are like really young kids.
Yes.
That are like immature, and again, they're not doing it necessarily because they're in poverty, just because they think it's cool to do that. Once you become a multimillionaire and now you're rich and you're famous and you're in your mid to late 20s now and you have a career, like, you should be able to look past that and mature past that, and set a better example, you would think. Right. And that should be perfectly respectable, but for whatever reason in that genre of music it's not.
What about Eminem? I mean, he stayed out of it for the most part. He was never in a gang that I'm aware of, but Eminem did just fine. I mean, he still talks about, it seems to me like a lot of Eminem, how many times have you heard Lose Yourself? Like Eminem talks a lot about kind of taking the bootstraps, putting his boots back on, and then ascending to where he needed to go to be successful, right? Like, you've seen 8 Mile, I'm guessing. Grew up in a trailer park, all that stuff. Detroit, like, not a good time when he was growing up. He's probably lucky to be alive on many aspects. But he doesn't seem to dabble in that. He never really did when he was when he was going through the ranks of becoming popular. And as far as I know, he never stayed or looked to be in a gang after that, right? I mean, am I missing something on that?
He's never been in a gang. But I think in order to get into a gang, you probably got to come from a place where gangs are. I mean, there's gangs in Detroit, but probably not like trailer park gangs like what Eminem is from, right? So, but for him, I mean, he still was involved in drugs and things like that, and he's had a lot of problems that a lot of these people talk about. And I can see where if you are struggling with these addictions and all these things, that maybe you can fall into crime that's drug related, but not like weapons trafficking and like sex trafficking and all this stuff
like P. Diddy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
That's wild,
yeah.
dude. Like it's like you probably went to a P. Diddy party, dude. Like, let's be honest. Like,
yeah. So. I think that they just I don't know. Their priorities are obviously not right. Now I wonder how much of that is the same effect that you would get if you take any person from poverty and hand them millions of dollars, like the cliche of somebody winning the lottery and then they end up blowing it all and then they end up broke after a couple years. Maybe there's that same effect here. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of football players or sports players end up in the same situation where they're just like normal people or potentially poor people, but they, instead of rapping, they're good at basketball. Now they get handed a contract where they've won life and they're
Correct.
18, they're 19.
Yep.
And they just can't handle it. And they end up broke, even though they've been handed all the resources in the world, just because they do not know how to handle it. And so I guess on that level, that's probably what's happening here. Only instead of just coming from being a regular person handed a basketball contract, you are someone who is a criminal being handed all that money. And so I guess it does make sense that you would continue that life of crime. It's hard for you or I to relate to that mindset.
Right.
Because their priorities are just fucked up, dude. Like, they just...
Yeah, like I heard a song one time, not from Young Thug, but like one of the songs is Murder on My Mind. Mm-hmm. I can't remember who sings it. By the way, the rapper I was just thinking about was Juice WRLD.
Oh, yeah.
Juice WRLD. But anyway, I heard a song called Murder on My Mind. He's like, I wake up in the morning with murder on my mind. And I'm like, dude, there's something wrong with you. Like, that's not a normal, that's psychotic.
Yeah.
Like, you need to go see the doctor, bro. Like, that's not normal. You know what I mean? And he was actually, I think, charged with murder, to believe it or not. But like you said, we can't fathom it because we grew up in a different, just type way of life, so it's hard for us to fathom. And quite frankly, like, they might even look at us and be like, I can't fathom how you guys grew up. You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean you didn't wake up and wanted to cap some people? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I wanted to just get like waffles in the morning and watch some TV or something, but hey.
So this is a played out topic in a way, but like how much of, like, because you have people that they come from those areas where, maybe you do need to get into a gang in order to be protected because it's infested with gangs. And so just like how if you go to jail, you got to, get with a gang, you have to do it if you grow up in an area that's dangerous as well. And I understand how that plays into rap and how rap has that relationship with crime. But there are a lot of people that would go to schools like that you or I went to growing up, and like everybody that lives in the suburbs of like a nice area knows some people that they just would they would identify with like rap music and like the lifestyle that comes with it. Like they think that they would be about that. Like I enjoy rap and I can listen to it, but I don't really relate to a lot of it, but it's good ass music a lot of times. Dude. But like some like white kids in the suburbs think that they are that, and it's just a delusion. But it obviously does have an effect on people that don't share any similarities to what these rappers are talking about. And if it has an effect on them and makes them want to act out and act like they are, like they're criminals and, sell drugs, how much of an effect does that have on people that actually are in those areas where that is a viable option? They know people that are doing that. I feel like it'd be even more impactful on their mindset and make it even harder for them to try to avoid doing these crimes. if it has that effect on the suburban kids, it's got to have a much greater effect on people in poverty areas.
Part of like your law enforcement schooling is you learn about gangs, right? Because you don't know where you're going to cop, so you might want to know like a little bit about how gangs are spun up, how it works, whatever, right? Well, you're probably aware, but like a lot of kids go into gangs because they don't have the protection at home. They don't have the figure to kind of keep them in line to go do stuff. You know what I mean? Which is why you hear a lot of times like sports is the way to keep them out of trouble, because it's a scheduled thing that you do at night, right? When a lot of times these activities are happening, you go do your stuff at night, you come home, go to school in the morning. You know, weekends a little different, figure that out. But for 5 days of the week, you know, you can get that figured out. So they go in these gangs to create that brotherhood or like some type of family feel, which is what they're craving. That's what, at least when I went to school like 7 years ago, that's what they were teaching. Because there is a lot of broken homes. A lot of kids crave that structure, and gang is a structure. I mean, you have a boss or whatever you want to call him, and then it goes down from there. If you listen to him and you do what he says, you're going to be rewarded with stuff, right? And that's what they crave, is that reward. Obviously, there's a lot of other negatives to it, but, you know, when they bring you in and they kind of, maybe they forward you $1,500, you know, they're like, hey, man, I saw your mom needs a new car. You know, here's $3,000, go get a used car, you know, or something like that. And they're like, wow, this is awesome, you know. And then next time he's like, hey, go shoot that dude because I gave you $3,000 last week. You know what I mean? So it's sad. It's sad, but a lot of people get involved in that. So, yes, sir. Anyway.
Yeah, that's all I got on that.
Awesome. Okay. Do you want to – I can introduce the next one?
Yeah,
you want to
do
do
that.
the third? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So our second story is Florida. So for those of you that don't live under a rock, you're aware that Florida has been decimated by 2 hurricanes. Can't remember the second one, but the first one was like Helene. Not just Florida, but kind of going up the East Coast. I know North Carolina got decimated as well, more inland, believe it or not, than on the coast. But this time we're going to be talking about Florida. So some of this article that we looked into was, you know, are people moving out of Florida because of these 2 hurricanes back to back? We're talking hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to fix the damage that occurred from these 2 hurricanes. The government's so far in debt that they can hardly help them to a certain extent. I mean, they're just destroyed at this point. So, you know, it starts out as, you know, are people really going to come back to the orange state of Florida, you know, the sunshine state, whatever they're called? And it said, like, historically, people will. And what I found interesting about this story is this is more like kind of down your lane. Like, this is real estate. This is kind of what your thoughts are. Now, being in Minnesota, obviously way different things to think about than a hurricane hitting us. But there's things around here that people hate, like negative 50-degree weather coming up here in the next couple months, stuff like that. So were you surprised by that when you saw that people are historically just going to stay there regardless of how much damage there is?
No, I mean, hurricanes happen every single year in Florida.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're moving down there, you would be dumb not to expect to get hit by a hurricane. I know a lot of people that are on my real estate team that work and live down in Florida. And I was talking to them about it, and that's just a part of life down there. So when those hurricanes were happening, I saw people posting videos where they're like, yeah, there's a hurricane going on, but we're still hitting the gym. And they were just at LA Fitness, just doing their workout in the middle of a hurricane.
Trees are sideways outside.
Yeah, exactly. And they're just like, yeah,
Yeah,
this is what we're doing. You know,
yeah.
we're not letting it affect us. And so that's just accepted. But they don't have to just deal with hurricanes. I mean, they also have sinkholes down there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know this was a thing, but this kind of ties into insurance, which I'll talk about in a second. But another natural disaster that happens there is you can just have one day the earth swallow up your house.
You're just laying in bed, and all of a sudden you feel like the shifting happen, and it's like, see ya.
Yeah, the ground just collapses in on itself and your house will go with it. So what they'll do is they will now put concrete down underneath the houses. And that way, if the ground all falls, you'll still be on a pillar of concrete and it'll all be fine. But there's all sorts of ways that your house can be completely destroyed and your entire life can be uplifted if you're living in Florida. And so that's causing a huge issue with insurance companies. And even here, we're really having issues with insurance in Minnesota because we had a couple bad hailstorms. And now insurance companies don't want to cover anybody's roof. So it's becoming a huge issue now where people go to buy a house and then they'll find out that they can't get a policy on a house because the roof is 13 years old. And even though the last 25 years, insurance companies are not willing to take any risk. Banks don't want to give you a loan if you don't have an insurance policy. And you might have to just you can still get a policy, but it might be 4 times as expensive. Down in Florida, imagine the amount of resources that are having to be just dumped into Florida every time that there's a storm like this to get everything rebuilt, only for it to be destroyed again.
Could happen next year. Yep.
Isn't it weird that as humans, I feel like throughout history, there's places that we would live or places we would not live based off of how habitable it is. But for Florida, which is just essentially a swamp that has terrible weather conditions, we just are determined to force that to be a place where humans can live, even though nature does not want us there.
No.
Why do we try to force ourselves on these places that are just a terrible place to live?
I think eventually. So I read a thing here where it said, in that article that I read, it said the last time they saw like multiple devastating hurricanes was like 2004. It was like they had 4 massive hurricanes in one season of the hurricane season, which I think lasts like middle of September through the end of November, like somewhere in there is like hurricane season. Well, if this increases, right, can you imagine if essentially almost every other year you rebuild your, because if you're on the beach, you rebuild your $1.5 million house every 2 years. Like at some point you're going to be like, I can't swing it unless you're like the Mark Cubans or, any other multi-millionaire, billionaire person. It's just not going to happen. So what makes me wonder is I think right now people are not concerned about it because it just doesn't happen nearly enough. Now, scientists say that you can go on the global warming thing, but like as the temperature rises on Earth, the sea levels rise, storms will become more increasingly intense, like we just saw with the hurricanes. I think more people not only will leave Florida, but will just move inland. Like eventually, like Kansas and Missouri are going to be like the most populated probably states. Probably not in our lifetime, but in the next 200 years, I can absolutely see that because most of Florida is probably going to be underwater and stuff like that. So,
well, you've always heard that in however many years, the sea levels are going to rise and like New York is going to be completely underwater. I remember hearing that in school, right? But at this point, there's so many places in this country that are completely inhospitable that honestly, the most inhospitable places end up being the most desirable. Like California has no water.
No, there's huge water crisis.
Right, and
huge.
That is like considered one of the nicest places to live when it comes to the environment. Like is a beautiful place. Florida has devastating hurricanes. It is an objectively dangerous place to live.
Yeah. Spiders
everything
that can kill you in
love,
one bite. Yeah.
Yes, everything you love can just be washed away into the sea. And I know so many people that go down there still and love living there. And New York could eventually be underwater. But when that happens, at this point, I expect that we are just going to build an Atlantis city and just be determined to keep it going. No matter how much the environment or the world tells us not to live there anymore, we're just going to find a way to keep it going.
Yep.
We're going to have like an island nation of New York.
It'll be the water tribe of Avatar or something, dude. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It honestly, it does make you wonder though. Like, I mean, let's say in 150 years that's going to happen. Like we're going to be underwater on the east and west coast and south coast, whatever. It does make you wonder what type of things they're going to come out with where that essentially is not going to matter. Now, the problem is that the temperature is also rising, meaning like animals in the ocean are dying. Like we can't survive without that. Like we can kill a bunch of land animals, but at some point, like we do need the ocean. And, like when we went out to Cancun this last November, basically a year ago, it was sad to see like the coral reefs are all brown. Like there's no color to them left. Like the water's basically bleached. All the coral reefs and stuff like that. Like there's like no fish in the area anymore, and it's sad to see. But
well, on one level that is sad, but you got to think like on land, we've always had forests covering the entire landscape, but we had to cut down the forests in order to make room for the Whole Foods, and so
Yes.
whenever we do move into this Atlantis solution, we're gonna have to clear out the coral reefs for the underwater Whole Foods.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a necessary loss. They're already dead. Might as well put something there.
I mean, what would you call it? Like, I mean, Atlantis. Yeah, I mean, it would be like a Kowalski's or something fancy that you'd go underwater for. That you'd have to get like scuba gear and stuff, though, right? Or
Well, if we're already talking about trying to send settlers off into space with SpaceX and things like that, that has got to be an infinite amount of times harder than putting people underwater. And there's so much space. If we have a population crisis where there's just not enough land, there's enough water that we can figure it out, a way to put people down there. And maybe it'll just be the poor people down there.
I feel like if the Earth is already overpopulated. They've said that like several times. We're at almost like 9.5 billion people or something like that, 10 billion people. I think at some point, like the Earth will like correct itself. Like either humans are going to just kill themselves off, because can you imagine if like the Earth was so populated that like in the parking lot out here, like there's a person within every foot because they just were that populated.
Yeah.
Like eventually people are just going to start killing each other because that like your animal instincts are just going to take over. So numbers are going to go down from that, or the weather's going to get so devastating that, I mean, even in Minnesota, like we're part of Tornado Alley. Like, can you imagine getting 15 tornadoes every year that kill 500 people per tornado? Like the big ones that are like a mile long. Like, I think eventually the Earth will reset itself, unfortunately. You know
Well, I
what
think
mean?
disease might be a way that I mean, we are fighting disease, but I mean, how many people died of COVID? Like, I mean, if there's that many people, I think one of the ways nature can correct itself is just by introducing these diseases into the population. That's probably one of the best things that you can do for the environment, is just kill off a large portion of the population. Like, environmentalists should have all been anti-vaxxers.
Imagine how that is though. Like seriously, like you've heard like in Florida, I think it was during Hurricane Helene when they're like everyone needs to evacuate. Like the governor is like, you guys need to leave. There is no question about it. Essentially, anyone like south of this area needs to go. And these people that are like, no, I'm not leaving. I'm like, dude, like this is different than like a snowstorm. Like literally a straw from McDonald's becomes a bullet at like 150 miles per hour. So, I mean, you can die from anything going through that window. And not only that, but then they're like, okay, well, write your social security number on your forearm. So essentially when you die, we can identify you off of your social security number. Like that's savage as hell, dude. Can you imagine if the governor's like, if you don't do it, just here's a Sharpie. We're going to hand out Sharpies. You know, we expect you to die. Like, I wonder if it ever sits into people that are so staunch, like, wow, we actually might die here. Like, the government honestly believes that we're just going to die. You know what I mean?
I think that a lot of people think that they're fine just staying because once they're stranded on their roof, a helicopter is going to come and save them. Because there is that effort from FEMA and the government and people sending donations that someone's going to come and save them. And then there's a huge outcry when the resources aren't there to help all these people, even though they were warned. They just expect, like, well, someone's going to come and save me. And so it's 100% on them. But each and every time there is all those resources sent out to go save those people that were dumb enough to not save themselves.
So it's kind of like they know that it's coming. But here's my question to those people. What, you being there, that house is going to be underwater just as much as if you weren't there, right? So why wouldn't I rather be in a hotel eating my continental breakfast, watching news and be like, damn, that's my house, man. Like, great, I'm not there. I can still charge my phone. I can drive wherever I want. Like, let's go see a baseball game today or something instead of me starving to death on my roof because I just wanted to prove a point to nobody.
Yeah.
You know.
Have you ever seen the film Up?
I have seen the film.
It's just like the guy at the start of the movie. So the whole plan is this guy's too stubborn to leave his house.
Yes.
So he just attaches balloons to it and flies away. That's what these people would be doing. They would all have balloon houses that they would fly like aircraft if they could.
Have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
Yes.
Okay. We may have brought this up before, but I feel like it also, like, some people truly believe that it's just not going to be as bad as it is. And then when the professionals, like, in the movie Don't Look Up, where he's like, no, there's like a 99.7% that we're all going to die. Like, this is a earth ender, like, meteor coming towards us. They're like, oh, so it's not 100%. It's like, yeah, but it's going to happen. You know what I
that
mean?
movie
like,
is actually about climate change. That's what it's.
Yes.
That's the whole,
Yeah.
I thought originally it was about COVID because of the timing, but
true.
really it's about climate change, which I guess you can argue that this is a result of that or whatever. But no matter how much the climate changes or how dangerous it gets, people are refusing to leave Florida. And I honestly, like, I know so many people that still aspire to go down to Florida. I was hosting an open house at this dude who was he was like a multi-million-dollar house while these hurricanes were going on. And so the night before, I went over to his house and I was talking to him and stuff. And he's like, yeah, we're selling this house and we're going to go move to Florida. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds nice. And then the next morning I go to his house and he's watching the news and he's standing in his kitchen. And I'm like, how's it going? He's like, good. He's like, you seeing this? And I'm looking at the news, and it's coverage about Hurricane Helene, and everything is destroyed. It is a hellscape, water world type scenario over there. And I'm like, that's you in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like, that's your future right there. And he was completely unfazed. He's like, yeah, well, like, he does not care at all.
But he has the money to not care.
I guess you're right.
You know?
So I honestly think that is the future of Florida. It's people that are either the snowbirds or people that live in sort of the Midwest and they want to move down there. It's rich white people of like the boomer sort of generation that's moving down there, and I think that's going to be a big issue because you have, honestly, I think a lot of the educated young people that are getting their education, graduating in Florida, are moving out of Florida and going other places inland. But then you have the people that are of their older generation that are already wealthy moving down to Florida. So Florida is becoming a old folks resort with nobody to run it. It's like a huge brain drain issue down there where it's going to be people that are not contributing, not working.
Well, and you got the Cubans moving into, stuff like that. Like,
yeah, it's just going to be rich people and the Cubans that work for them. That's going to be Florida.
Savage, dude. Hey, there's some rich Cubans, I think. I don't know. I don't know.
I think a lot of these people moved down there not because they like Florida, but just because they like DeSantis. Yeah. They're just trying to run away from the trans people.
And no income tax.
Exactly.
So that's
nice.
So
it's conservative sort of. A lot of them run away from places like we live in Minnesota, which is definitely a blue state. So I think a lot of the people that I know that are these rich white people that are older moving down to Florida they see it as like a haven state. Yeah. And it's a haven for their ideologies, not for their own well-being, because it's an objectively dangerous place to live. But yeah, I mean, those are the type of people where even if there was a nuclear war, those would be the ones okay because they still have the fallout shelter, right? Because they can afford it. So it's going to, I think in 20, 30 years, it's going to be an interesting place. And And that's why it's such an outlier. But it's these
Yeah.
places with good weather, man, always seem to be an outlier.
But look at California. I mean, that place is falling apart. And I mean, economically and some other things. But I mean, even the weather over there, the water crisis, they're starting to take water from like another aquifer or whatever it is. And like, that's a problem, dude. Like, if we run out of fresh, which we won't in our lifetime, likely. But once you run out of fresh water, like, you better figure out how to, use, I mean, people know how to make salt water into fresh water nowadays, but it's so consumable. It's like 5 gallons of seawater for 1 gallon of fresh water.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's just not plausible. You're right. I mean, when I retire, I plan on moving south or moving to a no income tax state like Tennessee or something, because I would prefer like to keep 25% of my money in my account and go spend that on like fun money or something.
Why would you care about your income tax if you're retired?
Because I don't want taxes coming out of my paychecks.
Oh, isn't that stuff already taxed ahead of time?
No.
Oh.
When I'm getting my
but you
pension,
get like a pension. Yeah, that's right.
When I'm getting my pension, dude, I don't want
Right.
taxes coming out of that. So
That's a unique situation.
Yeah.
That sounds nice.
Think of it this way: if I am getting $9,000 a month in my pension, do I want $3,000 of that, $3,500 of that going to taxes? No.
No.
Well,
so where do they get their money from though? In Florida, I mean, it's got to be made up somewhere.
It's got to be like higher clothing tax or higher. They make it up in other ways for sure.
So I mean, is that not the same? I mean, you feel like you're making more money because you're not paying an income tax, but it doesn't last as long.
Yeah, maybe. It's possible. I don't know. I know they have lower wages over there.
Yeah, I guess you don't care about that. I guess that does make sense. Like, I've always thought about like moving to like a third world country, like just go like live in. What if I retired at 45, moved to Venezuela? Yeah. I don't just live in a town. I have a compound to myself with a security force. And I live like Osama bin Laden, but in like a compound and get treated like a king.
By the way, like you can do that shit, dude. Like there was like I saw a thing for the Philippines. You can buy like a 10,000 square foot house for like $40,000.
Yeah,
in the Philippines.
Or go to like Puerto Rico or something.
Yeah, because one, everything is dirt cheap over there. Like our dollar is like 50 of their whatever dollars are, and I mean, you could literally build a kingdom down there for like $250,000.
Yeah. Want to move on?
Yeah, let's move on, dude.
So, in New Orleans, there's going to be a Taylor Swift concert, and
there is. Just
like a lot of other cities, there's terrible homeless encampments everywhere in New Orleans and all sorts of all these other cities, right? And so, ahead of this Taylor Swift concert, the government has made an effort to clear out these homeless camps that have existed for a while, and they're basically getting them away from the venue in what seems like just a way to preserve optics and maybe some level of safety. But these things have happened a few times where cities with major homeless issues will get rid of their homeless people only once they have visitors coming to the city, but not any other time. And a lot of times people that live in these cities and have to encounter these homeless people are asking, like, why don't they just do something about this? Like, what's stopping them from doing it? And then once other people come into the state or a visitor from like another country or some important visitor comes, they'll just bulldoze it all down and get rid of it in like 2 days. And you're like, why didn't you just do this before? In this case, they're moving the homeless people only a couple blocks away. But there's a lot of outcry from groups that say, like, they have the right to be here. We need to protect them. We can't just have them pack up and move. But honestly, man, like, I think that the average person is just getting fed up with homeless people. I think that the level of sympathy that the average person has just been steadily declining over the last 10 years as these problems get worse and worse in every single city. For people that live in cities, I mean, you can't even go and enjoy a walk anymore because of all the homeless people you encounter. Yeah. And it's just, people have sympathy fatigue in a way where they're just sick of caring about these people, even though everyone knows, sure, a couple people are down on their luck, but especially as the fentanyl crisis gets worse and worse, and the optics of that look so bad, because it's not just someone that is dirty sitting on a corner anymore. Now they're just sitting at the corner just like...
on the nod. Yep. Yeah, for real, dude. They're zombied out. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good. You've seen that before, you know? So, that's true, though. That's what it is.
It's just like... it's disgusting. And there's like so many different takes on it. I mean, some people think that it should just be illegal. In a way, it is criminalized. I mean, what do you... as much as we don't want homeless people around, I also don't know that it's the right solution to have it basically be criminalized. I mean, we have this system that people are supposed to get a job and then buy housing and provide for themselves. Some people fall through the cracks of that system and they fail to get a job for whatever reason. They can't hold a job. They're not able to qualify for the assistance in order to get housing, and then they end up on the streets. So should people be criminally punished for failing the system that we've set up?
So this actually might be the one positive to lighter sentencing is... you know, there are times where sometimes getting in front of a judge will help you in the long run, even if you did something criminal. Now, I'm not talking like serious shit. Like, I'm not talking you didn't shoot somebody or stab somebody. I'm talking like you had possession of meth on you or heroin or some type of drug, which is obviously likely with a lot of these homeless people. You get arrested. That honestly might be the opportunity for you to go to treatment, make the right decisions. Now, that's where we're at, right? Is like a judge can help you and say, okay, this is your first offense or whatever. You're a drug addict. 9 times out of 10, you're going to get probation and you're going to get mandated treatment or other things, right? At some point, those people do need to make that decision to follow through. They have to go to treatment, but it's what you do after treatment on those decisions, right? And if you're still hanging out with the same people, you're still doing those types of things, there is that. So as far as like the criminal portion of it, I think there is some positive to that, like going to jail, not to mention get a roof over your head for the night, which some actually look forward to jail for that reason, especially up here in Minnesota when it's wintertime. But I think there is some good to come out of that, where the public defender is going to be like, go to treatment, do your shit, do well on probation, and get off. Now, the success of that depends on the person, I think, but that's my thoughts on it as far as it being criminalized.
I was watching this video on the way here. Like, I was trying to find like a counterpoint, like why we should support homeless people, and I couldn't find anything to answer that exact question. But there was a like 1 or 2 minute long little animated video talking about basically how to empathize more with homeless people, and they kept calling them our homeless neighbors, you know, and not to be scared of homeless people, and like why giving them cash actually is a good thing, and you know, yeah, they do drugs, but you know, you do drugs too if you were poor. And something in my body just rejects that idea. Like, sure, there's probably a couple good ones out there and people that generally are down on their luck. But I think the reason why the people that are actually on the streets, that you do see on the street corners that are all fucked up on fentanyl, the reason they're so unpleasant on average is because the people that are down on their luck really aren't on the streets. Like, just think about your life. How many mistakes would you have to make in order to legitimately end up on the streets? Like, correct. That means no one is willing to help you. Like, I would have to burn 100 bridges before I ended up homeless. If their family isn't willing to help them, if nobody they know is willing to help them, I feel like even an acquaintance would be willing to let me stay with them if I became homeless. There's got to be a reason that nobody's willing to help them.
There has to be. And some of it is, I mean, I've heard things before where they're like, well, all my family moved out of state. It's like, okay, what about friends? Well, I don't have any friends or anything like that, okay? have you reached out to the tens of what seems like hundreds of resources here that will give you some type of housing? Look at Section 8. I mean, look at the other housings that they have in suburb areas where it's more like shelter areas, but they have rooms there for you. There's halfway houses you can go to. There's a ton there. But the problem is we're talking about addicts that are stuck in a loop, and they may not know how to get out of it, but I think they're also, I wouldn't say comfortable is the word, because like I said, I don't think anyone sleeping in a cardboard box in the middle of January in Minnesota is comfortable. But I think there's mentally for them, there's such a mountain to climb that it's a lot easier to shoot up 3-4 times a day and stay in that box and get $10-15 from passerbyers than it is to, you have to go there, you have to go to a worker, you got to fill out paperwork, then you got to go over here, you got to, I don't know, I've never been through the process, but you got to set up a lot of things to start the ball rolling your way. That's a lot of work. Not to mention you have to get clean. And for some people, they don't want to get clean because there's trauma or there's other things that they're just not willing to face. And but that's your choice, right? That is what you said, and you hit it right on the head with the bridges, man. I've dealt with people before where nobody will talk to them. Their mom won't talk to them, nothing, because they've been such assholes from stealing from them and other things. They've lost everything, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and some part of that is addiction. A lot of it's like mental health, but you know, even somebody that is not homeless, but just, you know, everybody knows somebody that just is not willing to help themselves, and they're not homeless, but like they're just not really making it. And people will say it's a mental health thing. I'm just like depressed, but like I don't really have a lot of sympathy for people that they just aren't willing to try, and they're just doing it to themselves. And a lot of times, if you ever know somebody like that, your instinct is to help them and drag them through the mud and just get them to the spot where you're like, well, I know that if I was in that position, I would just maybe need this one thing. Like, you know, if I just maybe help them to get their driver's license renewed, and then maybe like help them to get a car, then they'll be able to get to work and they'll be able to take it from there. But then they don't, right? And pretty soon you find yourself just like draining all of your own energy into this person who's just a black hole. And
just keep taking it.
And that's what all these people start out as. People are willing to help them, and then they just keep sucking people's energy until they just say, I'm not helping you anymore. Everybody does that in your life, then it is your fault that you ended up in that situation.
Dude, okay, so kind of to circle back to this, right? So like what New Orleans is doing with like the Taylor Swift, they also said it's also because the Super Bowl is there in February. So there's a lot of, they're trying to get ahead of this. I can imagine, just like any major city, they probably struggle with homelessness a lot. And I know some of this article said that the homeless people are filing a lawsuit against the state because state troopers went in there and they're claiming that it was unreasonable search and seizure of their stuff and basically moving all their property to that point. But it does make me wonder, like where is that? Like what do you mean? Like when I was reading that, it was hard for me to get around. Like, hey man, like that's my piece of sidewalk. It's like, well, no, like you need to find like an actual roof over your head. Like this is a public domain. Like,
well, they'll argue. They'll argue that because it is public, that it belongs to everybody, and so they have the right to use it for whatever they want. But a school is also public property.
Yeah.
So like, can they go and just camp out in a school?
No.
Well, obviously not. So like, how come a park is different?
Correct.
Because a school is meant to teach kids. Correct. Well, a park is meant for recreational purposes, not to just live there. I do think it probably would be okay. Like if there's in St. Paul, like there's some spots where there's just like trees and it's not for hiking. It's just there's trees there. Like if you want to go camp out there, like I feel like that's what I would do if I was homeless, and that would be fine. But like, what do you think about like creating like, why don't we have shanty towns in America where
like
in some
like
favelas, bro, like outside
like
of New Orleans,
too, man?
dude. there should be
Remember that map, dude?
yeah.
Like,
But like there should be spots where I mean if you're homeless, like you go here in some town in Africa, I forgot where it is. There's like this lake, or I think it's in the ocean. It's like this bay right outside of the city, and it's in Nigeria. So it's in the bay outside of the city. There's like a floating city that's like a floating shanty
raft.
town. Everyone there just built this like makeshift area, and they all travel around on boats, and they have like their own little economy there. And it seems like way safer than Skid Row. You know, if there's an outskirts of the city, at some point the city ends. Make that area. You can just build here's like 10 square miles or whatever, however much you need.
Right.
This is your area to just fucking build whatever you want.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem is that also is going to cost so much money, and they know that it's probably not going to be like, I understand the description of like, you know, the floating city and stuff like that, but I feel like over here, I mean, you kind of hit it on the head. I think these people are so enabled that they're not, if you give them something, they'll take it, but there's nothing in return. So like as a city or a state or even feds, like if you want to spend, I don't know, $10 million on a city, like essentially you're building a city, like the
government doesn't build it. The homeless people build it. They put their tents out there, and like this is just the homeless area.
I guess. I guess. I don't know.
Why not?
I mean, yeah, if there's a place that can do that, but there's always somebody to complain about something. If you put them out in the wilderness, the dudes from Swamp People on History Channel are going to be pissed because they're eating the fucking gators that they're trying to catch for profit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's always going to be some type of problem that runs into it. Like you move matter somewhere else, that matter is going to be a problem for a different matter, right? So it's like up here, like find a cornfield like in the middle of the state and just be like, these 100 acres are for you guys. Like do what you will with it, right? But like how many people are going to actually stay within those confines? Like somebody's got to get the drugs from somewhere, meaning you got to go somewhere to do it. Crime is going to happen. Like in the States, people are going to rely on 911 still. So like if somebody gets shot to death or something, they're probably going to call. Somebody's going to call. So the police have to go over there, and that's going to cost money for that, right? So there's just a constant, like, you move them, great, but now what? Who's gonna be the governing body over there? Because if some dude starts raping 15 women in there, like somebody's got to be responsible to get this dude behind bars. You know what I mean? So it's a mess, man. Like it's a mess, and unfortunately for a lot of states, it's getting out of hand. Like California, Joe Rogan talks about it all the time. He's like, it was so out of hand. He's like, I had to leave. Like these people are just so brazen. They're going in people's houses. They're leaving hypodermic needles in your yard. Like, bro, can you imagine just like mowing your lawn and then you just step on a needle? Like I would go like insane. So I don't know. And the other thing I think about that too, because I wanted to ask you this question: what do you think about? They do these like safe sites. So these people can go and there's Narcan there in these tents. And so they shoot up in this tent and then they're given Narcan. Like, what are your thoughts on that? You know, have you heard of those?
Yeah. And I mean, there's even like vans that'll come and
Yes.
they're mobile and they just hand out clean needles and things like that. And like, I mean, if that's something where people are just donating, then you can donate to whatever you want, right?
Sure.
But if that's something that the government is funding, which I'm sure in like San Francisco, places like that is actually government funded, then I think that that's obviously ridiculous. But I think that just comes down to whether or not you, like, I mean, whether or not you view that as a disease, like the addiction itself, it's just as a disease that these people are inflicted with, because then it's no different to the people that believe that. That's no different than handing out free vaccines to somebody or like free cures to whatever disease. Sure. But I don't view it like that. And so I personally wouldn't donate money, and I wouldn't like my tax dollars going to that. I don't think it helps anybody. It might like be a short-term solution, but like, let's be honest, helping somebody to get a fix is not going to buy them any more time to get a job or whatever,
Right.
or like
Yeah.
fix the solution in any way. And just like, have like a housing, and there is some housing out there, but like, imagine if they just built a big tower where they put all the homeless people into like a complex. I mean, that would be kind of like you said about the shanty town, like that would be the most crime infested,
Oh yeah. Well, they don't-
dangerous place.
When the problem is there's going to be no taking care of it.
Yeah.
Like, how many times have you seen like aided places, like funded places that people live in that just are way worse than if you out of your own pocket are paying for that place? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if I wasn't paying the mortgage for my house or anything, and I had like really zero responsibilities other than just like living under the roof there, bro, I'd have no issues like putting a sledgehammer through the wall. Like, it ain't my
Yeah, in
responsibility.
Section 8
you know
houses,
what I mean?
people
Like,
piss in the elevators. Like, they just don't care
Like
because
it-
they're not paying for it.
Correct.
And then in return, the management, the people that are in charge of running these areas, also don't put any effort into maintaining it because there's no respect either way. And so
No.
it's just a disaster. Nobody cares about each other, and terrible
It's sad.
communities. Yeah, it's a tough situation, but it's just, I don't know, man. I've been criticized by people I know for not having more sympathy for like homeless people, but when you're walking around and you get like bothered by a homeless person, I mean, sometimes the only way to just get through that moment is just to pretend like they don't exist. And that's sad that there's a subset of our society that you just literally have to pretend doesn't exist. But I mean, I don't necessarily see a problem with them moving these people because it's not their land. And I think visitors should feel safe, and it's best for the state to be able to have people come in and get the income of having the Super Bowl, having these Taylor Swift concerts without having to deal with homeless people bothering or potentially like, I mean, you got to think that if homeless people know that there's a whole bunch of people coming from out of town, like they're going to be concentrating in that area to try to take advantage of these travelers. And you can't have that either.
Dude, imagine sucking so bad that for a brief period of time the city is moving your ass because they don't want you to like influence or have a bad influence on the way the city looks. Like, you want to talk about depression, dude? Like, that would suck. Be like, man, I'm that bad of a person where like they literally are like essentially paying to move me out of here because I'm gonna steer people away from where I live. Like, wow. That's wild, dude.
One of the main arguments that people will give of why it's not fair to be so hard on homeless people is that, well, when you're homeless, you don't have an address. And so then you can't open up a bank account. And so then you can't get employment, right? Like it's a rigged system against them. There are so many, I was watching a documentary. The show used to be called All Gas No Breaks, and now it's called Channel 5 News. You would reckon Andrew Callahan, I think his name is.
Yeah.
So like he was embedding himself in with the sewer people of Las Vegas, and that was one thing he was exploring. Is like, how true is this? Because if you ask all the homeless people there, why are you stuck here? They're like, oh, well, I'm trying to get an ID. If I can get an ID, then I can apply for housing, and then I'll be able to like finally get back on my feet.
I know where this is going.
So then he'll go and he goes to these services that work with these people to do specifically that. And he's like, so how true is that? I was talking to this person, and they said that they tried multiple times and they can't get it. And then the guy's like, oh, I know him. I've worked with him all the time. And all he had to do was literally come in and like sign this piece of paper, and he would have it. But they're looking for an excuse to stay there. And if they go and sign the paper to get an ID, now they'll not have an excuse anymore to be homeless.
And then it's harder.
Yeah, because now they have to start climbing the steps.
Correct.
It's easier to just be at the bottom sometimes.
Yes.
And I think, honestly, homeless people are very open about this in a lot of cases. It's kind of a fad now on YouTube to go and interview homeless people and explore this issue. And so many homeless people just say, like, I'm just not ready to not be homeless right now. I kind of like it out here. There's no responsibilities. I don't have to be any place at any time. And there's got to be a certain level of freedom for the people that can't handle the responsibility. There's people out there that can't show up to work. They just can't show up to work on time. It's too hard. Those people might like it better to not ever have to worry about being somewhere on time.
I just think human nature, we've talked about this in the past, human nature, like instinctively, you want to take the path of least resistance, okay? As simple as I'll make it. If somebody said, hey, I need you to walk 5 feet and you'll get $1 million. Or I need you to walk 10 miles and you'll get $1 million. Well, naturally that person's going to take 5 feet because you can get it done quicker, less energy, stuff like that. Why would you work harder if you're comfortable where you're at? Doesn't make sense. So that the problem is never wanting to get out of it, and then you just waste your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, some people don't see the value in building a life. Like those beats I was talking about.
Yep.
They literally think that things like having a family or like succeeding is a complete lie. Like, and it's interesting as, you know, you or I who are in the stages of like really solidifying our family, right? And like we're in the stage where we're homeowners and we're married and having kids. Like there really is something to that. Like there's a lot of enjoyment gained from being a parent and like raising a kid and doing well in your career. There's a lot of people that they don't see the value in that at all. And so they would rather just, they are perfectly comfortable where they're at, even though you and I would be not comfortable there at all.
Right.
And so it's just interesting how different people are and like how different people's requirements are. And it's like self-expectations. If you don't expect anything of yourself, then yeah, you're just going to sit there and not do anything. But then it doesn't matter how many resources you give that person. Yeah. It's never going to change their mindset. So.
Awesome. Do you have anything else there?
No, that's it.
Okay. Thanks for joining us on our weekly podcast. Again, we release these episodes weekly and shorts daily. So please like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.
See ya.
Awesome, dude.
What do you got going on this weekend?